Hi there, welcome to Floating in Dreams. Today's video is going to be an overview of my 10 favorite bright colored eyeshadows. Welcome to everybody watching today. Thank you so very much for joining me. In today's video, we're going to be talking about 10 bright, fun pops of color that I love. Some of them are from my singles collection, others are from palettes that I have, and I just thought because we're heading into summer that it's a good time to talk about bright, colorful shades, because even though I love my neutrals, I also like a bright pop of something, but very often that's already going on in my clothing, and then sometimes I don't feel it really comes together in the look. But definitely a couple of years ago, it was all about trying lovely bright colors, and so I have quite a few favorites that I'd like to share with you. But before we get to the video, it may be good to know that I have fair skin with a cool to neutral undertone, which greatly skews my makeup preferences. And because I have been buying, trying, and reviewing makeup for more than a decade, I also have some very strong opinions, so you're here for the ride, and if you're into eyeshadow palettes, essence and Catrice, and getting the use out of your makeup, this channel may be right up your street. So if you'd like to subscribe to the channel by clicking the subscribe button down below and joining my Snow Angel family. Am I really going to be sharing 10 shades with you? I think not quite, because I actually have a couple of doubles. There's actually one palette where I have like 2 shades that I really like and I couldn't pick, and it was like, okay, I'll count the palette and then I can just chat about those 2 shades that I love the most from that palette. So the first shade I want to talk about is in my blue singles palette. Now, in case you don't know, I love changing around color stories and pulling things apart. So I've got a couple of videos up as well, and I have a video up where I did rearrange my entire single eyeshadow collection in April into color families. So I now have all of my blue tone shades together, all of my purple shades, all of my green shades, and I'm loving it. And in my blue palette, ooh, of course something has popped out. Where'd it go? Yeah. And in my blue palette, which is missing a shade because it's in my current single eyeshadow, look at that. Oh, I love the way this looks. I have this shade right here, and this is Hydra, and this is by Devinah, and it's my perfect, like, bright, not quite neon blue, but like a really, really good bright blue. And these, I've tried several of them over the years. I've tried them in palettes, I've tried them in singles, and this is my favorite one. You can see it in a swatch, hopefully. Why? Because these kind of bright blues are very difficult to get formulated right. They tend to be very chalky or powdery very often. They very often don't have a very good payoff. But this one, because it's not quite fully matte, even though I feel that when you apply it to the lids, it performs like a matte, but it has the most subtle satin finish you will ever find in an eyeshadow, which makes it a lot more blendable than a lot of the other bright blue mattes I've ever tried. So I'm hoping they still do it, because I've had mine for a while and I haven't tried any Devinah shades ever since I bought a couple of them. But Hydra from Devinah, if they still do it, is my favorite bright blue, matte kind of satin kind of shade. It performs like a matte, but it definitely swatches like a satin. My next favorite shade in my bright category is actually in my purple palette. So again, really nice, satisfying overview of a lot of purples, and one of my favorite bright shades to wear is what I would like to call a blurple. The perfect combination of a blue with a purple. And my favorite blurple that I have kept over other blurples in my collection is this one, and this is Fierce from Sydney Grace. Now, in case you don't know, Sydney Grace is one of my favorite brands when it comes to single eyeshadow. Yes, they are a little bit expensive if you're in the EU, because they are in the United States, like Devinah is. But Sydney Grace is simply one of my favorite brands for single eyeshadows. Most of their singles retail for around the $5 price point. They do very regular sales, and their quality is amazing. If you love like high-end quality, then Sydney Grace will offer you that in a single shadow, very on par with things like a Natasha Denona or, you know, a Pat McGrath, like that kind of level of intensity. Great pigmentation, great blendability, and I cannot rave about them enough, so I'm glad to share another one of my favorite Sydney Grace shades with you. Now, a shade I don't wear a lot on my eyes is a bright pink. I'm wearing something that's more like pinky coral peachy today, which kind of goes with what I'm going with right now, but the shade I want to share with you is a lot brighter. My number 3 favorite bright shade is in this singles palette, and this is like the overflow. These are all the shades I couldn't put into any other palettes, and this shade right here is a matte from Colourpop. It's the shade Sandbar, and Sandbar is a shade that's also in the Ooh La La, if you can still get your hands on that, or if you own it. So you may actually already have this if you do happen to own that palette. But Colourpop does singles too. They don't really promote them anymore though. They're still on their website as far as I'm sure, and I think you can still get this one too. And Sandbar is quite possibly one of the best bright pinks I have ever gotten my hands on, which is why when I decluttered my entire singles collection last month, I decided to keep this out of all of my Colourpop singles with just a couple of other ones, because this one is truly something differently and special compared to other things in my collection. For my number 4, I need to reach into my blue palette yet again, because if you don't know anything about me, one of my favorite shades to wear is a teal. And teal, if you turn up the brightness of it, actually goes into a turquoise. And turquoise is very much part of this blue palette. We can see an entire nicely like turquoise kind of vibe going on in the corner here. And this shade right here in the bottom, right next to Hydra, is another Sydney Gray shade. This is Marine Waters, and this is one of those really stunning, not quite green, not quite blue, with a bit of shimmer, because I love a turquoise shimmer, for sure. And this is just such a lovely shade. The deeper things that are true teals are more in this spectrum here, but you can just see that it's like a matter of turning up the depth or like dialing up the brightness of it, and that's what is going to get you your turquoises. So I love this shade to pieces. It's incredibly well pigmented. It's got great blendability, like I've already mentioned about Sydney Gray, so that's why that is one of my favorite like bright teals and shimmers as well, because I love a good bright shimmering option for sure. Now, I mentioned that there was a shade missing from the blue palette because it's currently in my custom singles palette, and there's a shade in here that I wanted to mention. So I have a bunch of lethal shades in here, and one of my favorite lethal shades is the one in the middle. This is the shade Vortex. It's one of the best limey chartreusey greens that has a lot of yellow running through it, which just makes it the perfect bright pop of color for the spring season for sure. So that's why this one definitely had to get a mention here. I think I've got some like this is an Inglot shade, and I think this is actually the one that comes from the blue palette, if I'm not mistaken. I have to figure that out again when I reorganize and redo my singles palette again. I haven't played with this one yet. I'm a bit behind filming content and trying out eyeshadow this month because I got a little bit busy and I wasn't wearing a lot of makeup this month. So I'm a bit behind, so I'm just going to roll trying this out and refilming that like custom singles thing into June. But yeah, the Vortex shade by Lethal is amazing. If you're looking for a really good bright lime color, again, a shade that is so difficult to get right, but Lethal nailed it. The next palette I have to share with you is perhaps a bit of an odd one out because it's the Melt Waiting Room palette. And the Melt Waiting Room palette is quite a grungy color story. It's reds with grays, if I can open it, yes. So this is what the palette looks like, but I love how you get some like, it's not like true vibrancy, but this red that we get in here is quite possibly one of the best red eyeshadow shades I've ever come across. Even though everything else is really dark and sultry, I love that we get a bright red. Do I wear that a whole lot? No, because the overall vibe of this palette is a little bit more like vampire in the wintertime kind of vibe, so it's not something I wear often, but I do really appreciate this color story, and having a good red eyeshadow, yet again, something that's really difficult to do. There's just something about some of these brighter pigments that can cause brands trouble in terms of formulation, and I remember back in the day, everybody was like always going on like these bright blues and these reds, how difficult they were to get right, and I love how we now get options that do perform very well. Now, if you've been with me for a while, then you know that one of my favorite Bright palettes is the LA Splash Classic Horror. Sadly, I can no longer find this one. It's got stunning packaging, as we can tell here, all the zombie ladies on the front. And this palette has one of my favorite Bright periwinkle shades, and it's this. It looks more like a sky blue in the palette, but I definitely feel it's got that hint of like a lavenderish quality to it that makes it more of a periwinkle than a straight up sky blue. If you swatch this next to other blues, you'll see the difference. But here in the palette, especially because everything else is quite murky, you probably don't expect this to be a periwinkle, but it definitely is, and it's one of my favorites. It's got really great pigmentation. It's a great matte. Another one of those shades that's incredibly difficult to perform, to get it to perform well, I should say. So that's another reason why I appreciate that one, and it's the shade that makes the palette for me. So that's why I have to give it another shout out here, because I love it. Shade number 8 is going to be from the Slush. If you saw my rainbow palette comparison in April, then you will have seen this being featured and me saying how this is actually my favorite rainbow palette, but I believe something else actually came out on top when I did the comparison. But this actually has a couple of like softer neon shades, and one of my favorite shades in this palette is the neon orange. That may be unexpected because I always keep saying how I don't necessarily like orange eyeshadow, but because this is so bright and it's got a lot of a white base to it, it blends into my skin tone really well. If you have deeper skin, this kind of palette probably needs a white base or a very light base for you to really make it work. But I really appreciate how this is a rainbow palette that gives me all the shade options of a colorful rainbow, but dialed down to the point where my fair skin really makes this palette pop. So that's one thing I really appreciate, and that neon is just everything. I'm now actually, because I decluttered my Huda Beauty Neon Obsessions, the orange one I used to have, and looking at this palette right now, I'm like, right, I was right to declutter that because I have all those shades in here, and that orange can definitely give me the same like popsicle vibes for the summertime that I really appreciated the Huda Beauty for, but I have it in this palette. Sticking to neons for a moment. If you want a good bright palette, but that has some grunge and some depth to not make it overly bright than some of the other options I've already shown you, then the Blend Bunny Cosmetics Surge palette is one of my favorites. And we get neons in here. We also get some pastels, so there's pastels at the top, but you get a full row of neons. And this neon green, I did a look years ago. We're talking very early blogging days. It must have been like 2010 or 2011. I remember I went to a concert in Amsterdam afterwards, and I did a neon green inner corner using the, was it the Acid palette from Sleek? I used to own that one. And this is the replacement for that. So like, yeah, this with like the neon green inner corner, that's the look. I love it. A neon green inner corner is just going to elevate every single look you could possibly do. I probably would never do like a full-on neon look, but using neons as a bit of an accent, especially in the summertime, can be incredibly fun. And finally, last but not least, I wanted to share my Menagerie Feral palette with you. I thought they were gonna discontinue this, but the last time I was on the Menagerie website, this was still available. I'm not sure what's going on there. Maybe they're not discontinuing it because so many people got mad when they announced that. And this is my favorite bright palette of all time. So I don't prefer a full-on rainbow color story. If I wanna do bright eyeshadow, I wanted to still have different options as well. So we get some neutral tones in here, so you can do a full-on neutral look. That teal is amazing. These pinky corals are amazing. You have the purple, the red, and 2 matte greens. My 2 favorite shades in here are this shimmering green and the matte yellow. Again, yellow, an incredibly difficult shade to get right. I remember back in my nail polish days, I don't wear lots of nail polish anymore, but finding good yellow nail polish was always the thing that everybody was trying to find, because good yellow nail polish was something that was very difficult to find. But in eyeshadow, I find that yellows can be quite tricky too. This green is one of the best shimmering greens in my entire makeup collection. So I really hold this very near and dear to my heart. This is one of the first ever Menagerie palettes I ever bought. So this is it's getting a little bit old, but the shades still seem fine. Mine haven't cracked or anything. They don't smell funky. I can still use the palette for sure. So if I want to go for that bright moment, that palette is definitely one that I would recommend. And that's it. Those are the 10, well, 11 if we count both of the Menagerie shades, bright eyeshadow palettes that I think are really, really stunning. Let me know in a comment down below if you're into playing with brighter colors, if it's the summertime. I personally love it, and we've been having some really great weather. One of the reasons I'm filming this after I finished work, and that's just some of the things I love about like May, June, July, August, is that I can actually film after having been at work all day. I just whacked on some new makeup and I sit down to film, and I still have good enough lighting. So yeah, I want to embrace the brightness. In fact, I wore pink pants today with this green shirt and like white trainers with a green accent that matched the shirt. I thought it was a look. I forgot to take a picture, but I thought it was a nice clash. So yeah, I love my bright colors. Like I mentioned at the start, I wear it more so in clothing than I really actually still do eyeshadow, but I love a bright pop of color on the lips as well. So bring on the bright season, and I hope you're here for it. So thumbs up this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more by me. And in case you're curious, then of course you can stay tuned for more by subscribing to the channel, and then I hope to see you in my next video. Bye-bye!